If not, let me know and I'll help you out. Friday night in Green Bay, Dr. Bergman is going to debate Dan Barker. Dan Barker is a former Christian pastor who became an atheist, and he is now a very active atheist, and he is the president or co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison. And Dr. Bergman is a former atheist who is now a Christian. And so they've traded positions, and we thought it would be really interesting to hear the two of them duke it out for a couple of hours. And I think it's going to be a very amazing debate. So if you have the opportunity to go to Green Bay, that would be awesome. Otherwise, I think Randy's going to try to capture it on video. And if we're lucky, we might even see this on TV 30. So you never know. So we don't know if that's going to work out, but we're sure going to give it a try. So do you have any? Oh, Ken has an announcement. You have an announcement?
Some of you called on the phone about the meeting tonight, and I mentioned the fact that if you come, would you sign up on our sheet here, and I'll get you on our mailing list. Then you'll find out what our meetings are in the future. Okay, so I'll be passing this up. Those of you who are members already don't necessarily have to sign in, but the fact is we are looking always for new people. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, so if there's no other announcements, I will introduce Dr. Bergman. And Dr. Bergman, as I already said, grew up an atheist, and through the study of science found that there's no way this happened by itself, and there had to be a creator, and he's come a long ways since then. Now I have here a list of his credentials, but if I read the whole list, Dr. Bergman won't have any time to speak, because it's like 2 pages long of credentials, but the highlights are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Bergman has 9 earned university degrees. 3 of them are PhDs, is that right? Oh, only 2.
Only 2.
Oh, Dr. Bergman has only 2 PhDs. I'm really disappointed now, you know. But he is an amazing man, very intelligent, very resourceful, and I'm privileged to introduce to you Dr. Jerry Bergman.
Thank you very much. Get this thing to work. Is it working now? Yeah, okay, it's working. Okay, the topic is creation in 6 days. And ironically, this is probably the most controversial topic in the whole creation and non-creation movement. And I don't really think it's that much of a problem. I'm amazed at how many people get hung up on this one issue. And I'll try to explain where I'm coming from and why I've concluded what I have. First of all, it's clear from the scriptures, as most of you know, that God created the heavens and the earth. The word creator is synonymous with God. I said the word we praying to our creator, you know what I mean. I mean, the words are so synonymous that basically God created, they're interchangeable. Isaiah 45:18, Lord says, you created the heavens, he is God, he fashioned and made the earth, founded it, he did not create it to be empty, but formed to be inhabited. And Revelation 10:6, the end of the Bible, talks about the same thing. Notice the heavens, not just the earth, but also the heavens. And Genesis, is it a myth, fact, or fable? And as I said, it's very controversial. In fact, the most controversial books in the Bible are the first and the last, which I think is interesting. The middle is okay, just those 2 ends are the problem, it seems, with many people. And the church is clearly split over this. Was it 6 days or 14 billion years? And there are many positions I could add, not just 1 or 2, but there are 35, and I'll just look at 2 positions. My throat holds out here. I'll look at 2 positions and of the 35. But basically, this is the big contrast. 6 days or 14 billion years. When I was in college, just starting college, the earth was not 4.6 billion years, as they say now. It was only 2 billion years. So in a few years, it's doubled in age. So I'm trying to show my conclusion before I get there. Basically, I'm going to say that creation is the greatest miracle in the Bible. A lot of miracles in the scriptures. And my conclusion is 6 days, well, obviously that's a miracle. Okay? But scripture says 6 days, science 14 billion years. How do we coincide that? How do we harmonize that? First of all, when you look at science, what does science have to say? Well, first of all, and I'm teaching astronomy this semester, so we cover this. And there's about, now this is an oversimplification, but about 100,000 galaxies, each which has about 100,000 stars. Farthest galaxy away is 11.2 billion light years away. So it takes 11.2 billion years for light to get from that star to the Earth. So therefore, you see the star as it looked, according to science, 11 billion years ago. That's the biggest problem. That's the biggest issue that creationists have to deal with, and there it is. Actually, they found one that's a little bit farther away. In fact, they found one that seems to be older than the universe, which is interesting. And there it is, in case you want to check your telescope. Can't really see it there, but it's there. And Christianity has always taught, and Judaism and the Muslim faith, by the way, have always taught creation ex nihilo. Creation ex nihilo is creation from nothing. Okay? And when you create from nothing, you always, always, always have the appearance of age. If I was to create a pencil from nothing, you would look at that and say, gee, that had to grow the tree, you had to cut the tree down, you had to shape the pencil, you had to put lead in there. It couldn't be, very new. It must have been, to build it, this pencil must be months or even years old when you look at the wood and the parts of it and so on. So now let's look at Adam. And when Adam was created, how was he created? Well, to be alive, he had to be created instantaneously, and that's pretty well accepted. That's not the controversial area. But God could not have created a lung here and a kidney there and another something else somewhere else and then put them all together. It's not going to work. The organs would have deteriorated before he got them all together. He had to have been created as a unit, a functional unit that works. And blood must be, importantly, circulating in the arteries as soon as he was created. Otherwise, he would have brain damage and he would have died. Brain can only go so long without oxygen before it kills the brain cells and kills the patient, the person. And there's Adam, according to Michelangelo. And I don't know, he doesn't look like he's a day old there. He looks like he's 25 maybe, 25 years old. And looking at his head, he looks pretty mature there. I don't see much evidence of a beard, but otherwise he looks pretty mature. So let's take our Adam and let's give him a medical exam. Okay, the medical exam would do his weight, his height, his blood pressure, his cartilage ossification, his teeth, and a medical exam would probably say he's about 20, 25 years old. So science would say he's 25 years old. Other measures, though, would indicate no, he's not 20 years old. For example, a measure of his cholesterol would be a good example. His calcium deposits in the arteries, atherosclerosis, DNA damage would probably say he's a day old, a week old. So evidence would be mixed on our Adam. Some evidence says he's old, some evidence says he is quite young. And there you can see this the artery, and plaque accumulates right here between this outer layer, the endothelium, and the muscle here, which is part of the artery in this case. There's muscle, smooth muscle tissue here. And this is the endothelium. Here's the plaque, which accumulates. And you can measure that in young people. And you find evidence in young people they have significant amounts of plaque, which surprised people. What they did is they took people who got killed in war or car accidents, and they did analysis on them, and they found out that they assumed that they would not have any plaque. That's not something we developed till we're 60 or 70, was the assumption. But when they did analysis of young people they know who didn't die of heart disease, who got murdered or car accident, they died, they then found more than they expected amounts of plaque in young people. And so that indicates that Adam likely would not have had the plaque because he wasn't 20 years old. But in order to be alive, you'd have to create Adam with all these parts. Could not live unless you had the complete number of parts. Like anything else, you're not going to be able to have a car function as a car until you have a certain minimum number of parts. They call that irreducible complexity. So Adam was clearly taught as real in the Bible. Corinthians, for as Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. And here in Corinthians 15:45, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last, Adam, a life-giving spirit. So the scriptures clearly teach Adam as a real man, the first man that ever lived. So, conflict. Science says, Scripture says. How do we deal with that? Well, I will try to show you. The age question, some research says the earth is young. Some research says the earth is old. Same problem we have with Adam. Some research indicates he's young, no plaque in the arteries. Some research indicates that he is, 20 years old. So we have a conflict. We have the same conflict here. No different. And these are some examples. There are many, many examples. I have hundreds, but you don't want to be bored with listening to hundreds of examples. But you can see this, according to this measurement, the earth is 2,000 years old. Well, that couldn't be true. This measurement is 100,000 years old. This, it's 100. This, it's 20 million. This, it's 160. This, it's 350. The same problem we have in trying to figure out the age of the earth. We select the date that seems to make sense. So we have a lot of dates, and we select the one that makes sense. Now, obviously, you have to do that because, well, this certainly couldn't be right. I mean, there's no way. Probably your grandfather was born more than 100 years ago. So we can eliminate some of these dates. But it's a problem in figuring out dates because what we do is we take a current process and we extrapolate backwards. That's how we determine how old things are. In teaching astronomy, of course, dates are very important, so the book discusses this quite a bit, and it tries to help the students understand how they get the dates that they do. And they do a pretty good job showing, indeed, we use this method and we get this date, but if we use another method, we get another date. But that's a problem, and so we've settled on this date. And they may change. It stresses the key thing about science is it is changeable. New evidence comes along, then we have to change the date and this and that, and it brings several examples in the book where indeed this had to take place. Another key aspect of science is you have to be skeptical. If you're not skeptical, you're not going to make progress. If you believe everything that science teaches today, you're not going to make progress. You make progress by being skeptical, by saying, well, I don't know if that's true. I'm going to do some research. And people do, and they find, well, every now and then, things they assume are true are not true. And that's where progress comes from. And I think it's my job as a professor to help students be skeptical about science because someday one of my students may take the skepticism, do some research, and discover indeed what's accepted today is not in fact true. So skepticism is critical. Appearance of age. Just as Adam has the appearance of age, of course, so does the universe. God would not create Jupiter and then wait a couple thousand years and then create Saturn and then wait a couple thousand years. But you might say, well, the universe or the solar system here is different than a body. Well, think about that. The universe, and you teach astronomy, you see that very clearly. The universe is a functional whole. And we could go into detail, but I'll just look primarily at the moon. There's the moon. You've all seen the moon before. But do you know without the moon there wouldn't be life on the earth? We must have the moon for there to be life on the earth. It's got to be there. And I have plenty of books that we use in the class. I even have a film done by NPR. Does an excellent job showing without the moon we wouldn't have life on the earth. We have to have a moon. So God would at least have to create the earth, the moon, and the sun. And we find when we look at the other planets, they also have a very important role in the solar system. Some bodies obviously less important than others, but nonetheless they have an important role. And there you can see selected moons of the solar system with Earth to scale. Some of these moons are pretty gigantic. The Earth-Moon relationship is unique. And that relationship must be the way it is for life to exist on the Earth. And there's one of many books I have. What if the moon didn't exist? This is not written by a creationist. It's written by an evolutionist. And basically it talks about, well, what if the moon didn't exist? Well, we wouldn't be here. So we need the moon. We need not only the moon, but we need the sun, obviously. We need the solar system as a unit, and I could go on and argue we also need galaxies, which are also moving imparts stability. And therefore, to be stable, has to move. And therefore, we see this movement in the universe which imparts stability, which is important for life to exist. And there you can see all the planets. And they all have a role in the Earth being the way it is. One of the major roles is to deflect meteorites and comets. That's why it's pretty rare for a meteorite to hit the Earth, because these large bodies attract, especially Jupiter, which is, of course, huge. There's the Earth, and there's, in fact, this isn't to scale, sorry. But there's the Earth, and there's Jupiter. The Jupiter is much, much larger than the Earth. And Jupiter is a good magnet to deflect comets and meteorites, which is important in its role of producing the Earth, which is fairly stable. And there you can see they all are. Okay, and you can see as they spin around, now some meteorites get by, of course. A lot of small ones get by, but not very many large ones get by, at least in the time that we've looked at. One concern about this Genesis is a literal interpretation. Well, it's not literal, but it's historical. Genesis is history. Okay? We don't interpret, obviously, a lot of the Bible literally. It's poetry, there's psalms, there's parables. Best example is, of course, the earth spoken of in the Bible as having four corners. Well, we know it doesn't have four corners, right? It doesn't throw anybody. But we use the same expression today. The earth has four corners. And we know that's not literal. So we understand the scriptures according to, well, how it's written. We have to look at the context. And there are other expressions, like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Well, we know it doesn't do that, right? The earth turns. Sun doesn't go around the earth. But that expression fits us, and that expression was used in the Bible, and we don't have any problem with that. Most people don't. So, Genesis is history. Now, give it a few other miracles. Turning the water into wine. Now, you could, if you wanted to, you could turn water into wine. Very easy. Just get some seeds and plant them and water them and grow the grapes and harvest them and make wine. It would take you, I don't know, how long would it take? A few years, 10 years, whatever. It would take you a while, but you can turn water into wine. What was the miracle? The miracle was God did it instantaneously. Time was the miracle, not turning water into wine. That's not a miracle. That is what we can do, and anyone can do if they have the time. The miracle is the time factor. And that's important in a number of the miracles that we'll look at. Here we go, brought the blind, the crippled, the mute to Jesus, and he healed them. To some degree, that's a matter of time. He could go back to when they were in the womb, figure out what happened, if it's genetic, repair that, and then repair that in the man today, and correct what's wrong, and he would heal them. So to some degree, this is an illustration of surpassing time, of transcending time. Better example, resurrection of Lazarus. Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days. All he has to do is go back 4 days, and Lazarus is alive. Okay, and then fix whatever's wrong, and then Lazarus would be okay. Now, that's central because they said his body smelled. Decay already began to set in. And as a result, logically just going back 4 days, undoing the decay, and then healing whatever was wrong, an aneurysm or whatever it was, and then bringing Lazarus forward. And here, John, you can see 11:38-39 talks about that. Lord, Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been in the tomb for 4 days. Okay, when you look at miracles, the question is, let me get one of my cough. Thanks for modern medicine, eh? The question is, where do you draw the line? Most Christians say water to wine, no problem. Virgin birth, no problem. Heal a blind man, no problem. Resurrection of Lazarus, no problem. Joshua's long day, no problem. Creation of the universe, nope, can't accept that. How can you draw a line there? When I spoke in Canada, there was several atheists there, quite a few actually, and we talked about this, and they realized that either accept all of the miracles or none of them. I mean, isn't that to be consistent? How can you and I say, first two miracles, no problem. Third miracle, no problem. How can we draw a line here? We can't. At least I think we can't. Maybe you can, but I can't. So that's an important point to think about. Exodus 20:11, God not only said he created in 6 days, he wrote it down in stone tablets, of course, the 10 Commandments for in 6 days. The Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that's in them, and he rested on the seventh day. So, again, we have clarification of the 6-day creation. And notice it said, the heavens and the earth and all that is in them. So, I'm assuming that means the entire universe. Okay? The cost of accepting Scripture. Tragically, and I say most, but maybe it's not most, but I know many theological seminaries that teach Genesis is a myth and creation took whatever time scientists say. And the problem with that is it 2 billion for the earth, or is it, how old is it? Is it 4 billion? 4.6 billion now. So accepting what scientists have to say uncritically can be a problem. Not that we shouldn't consider what science says. Tragically, even more so, I think, is that most or many Christian colleges will not hire those that accept the 6-day creation. They won't hire you. And Wheaton is a good example. I applied for a job at Wheaton, and a friend of mine wrote me a wonderful letter of reference. And so they hired my friend and not me. I felt, see, that I didn't write him a letter of reference, but he wrote a letter for me, and he was not a 6-day creationist, and therefore I guess, Wheaton thought that's okay. And even if you are a 6-day creationist, well, you can teach astronomy. I can teach astronomy, no problem. Talk about the estimates and how they get the estimates. I don't see any problem with that. I mean, haven't had any conflicts at all in that class, and I don't see how one would. So even if you accept the 6-day creation, there shouldn't be any problems in teaching anything. That should not enter it. You can just say, well, some people believe that this isn't how it's done, that these dates are not correct. But nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with saying that this is the current estimate among scientists, believe that this planet or this whatever is so many billion years old. Conclusion, science tells us the universe is 14 billion years old, just as science tells us Adam is 20 years old. And, well, Adam is a miracle, the universe is a miracle, this is the definition of a miracle. Both are miracles. And I don't see that as being controversial. By the way, I should add that this view of creation ex nihilo is held by a lot of people like Don DeYoung, who I think was down here last year and spoke. Dr. DeYoung, he's at Grace College. He accepts this, written an article about it. And so Dr. Henry Morris accepts this idea. So it's not at all unusual. Many Christians throughout history have accepted the idea of creation ex nihilo and thus the appearance of age. And so it's not unusual at all. Maybe it's just not talked about that much. That may be one of the problems behind it. Should I go into my next presentation or take questions, or what should I do? Anybody? I gotta get my computer to work. I guess I can go to the next presentation. I'll do a kind of abbreviated version of it, if I can find it here. Computers. Let's see.
I've got a question yet. Just a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
About like Christian colleges not hiring people because they believe in creation.
Mm-hmm.
How strong? I mean, that just shows that there's a movement to what? Eliminate the belief in the Bible or the 6-day creation.
Yeah, that's what I would say. There's the reason a lot of colleges say they do this is they don't want to lose credibility in the eyes of the world. And that's why they say. So if you're in the closet, that's not a problem. But if you're out of the closet and making a fuss about it, then they don't want you to embarrass the college. and as a result, there's a problem. So, yeah, we can ask questions while I look for the other.
I am wondering how you answer those who say if the most distant star is 14 billion light years away, how did the light get here if the universe isn't 14 billion years
Okay,
old?
the best answer is we take Adam, do a blood evaluation 1 second after he was created. What would we find in his blood? We'd find oxygen, but yet that blood never went to the lungs. We would find food, nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, but yet he didn't have any meal. There was no digestion. There was no food. May have been food or not food in the stomach, but the blood had all that's necessary to live. And that blood would have had to have that for him to live, but yet some people say, well, that's a lying. That's not being honest. It's deceiving. But it would be deceiving if you're a doctor and you evaluated Adam at 5 minutes and you found his blood was highly oxygenated, but it never went to the lungs, or most of it never went to the lungs. Well, that's not deceiving. That's just the way it has to be. That's the way you have to create something to work, like Adam and like the universe, and at least like the solar system. And so it's not, I don't see that as a problem. So yeah, it looks like it was 14 point whatever billion light years away, 11 with this one. But in order to make the universe functional, if the universe was created in 6 days, we wouldn't be able to see most of the stars, because they'd only be 6,000 years old. We couldn't see most of the stars, and the scriptures say the stars were put in the heavens as a light for the night. So, and I admit it takes some faith to accept that, and that's not a problem. I mean, we realize that part of creationism is faith. Much of it is fact, but part of it is faith, and it takes faith to accept that. And to me, it doesn't take a lot of faith. It makes sense. And I could mention there are really big problems with the 4.6 billion AIDS for the Earth, and the 6 million AIDS for man. Namely, if we were, as one actually authority says, I could quote him if I could find the reference here, but if we were 6 million years old, we'd have been dead a long time ago. Why? Because each generation we accumulate more and more mutations. The estimate is we accumulate between 100 and 200 mutations. This is from a biochemistry book that we used at college. Each generation accumulates between 100 to 200 new mutations. So that's 100 to 200 new mutations for your kids. Of course, you probably already knew that. And then their kids, your grandkids, be 100 to 200 more mutations.
Like ADD and ADHD and are those all mutations?
Which?
ADD and ADHD?
Well, there's probably several factors involved. Likely genetics are involved in a lot of these things, but likely there are several factors involved. Mutations could also be hormonal influences and many, many factors, environment, etc. Back here, there's a question. Still trying to find my PowerPoint. Seems to.
I think Dr. Jason Lyle, I've studied this quite a bit about the speed of light and that. And in one part he talks about asynchronous, the light, how it travels, and that the speed of light cannot actually be measured one way. You have to measure the average speed, because in order to actually measure the one-way speed of light, you have to know the one-way speed of light. So actually, the round-trip speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. The one-way speed of light may actually be instantaneous, and the Bible even actually says that. God says it was, and it was so.
Yeah.
That when the stars were made, the light shined immediately. And there's also a part, I think, in several times in the Bible where it talks about God stretching the heavens. Well, when you stretch the heavens, Einstein even said you change time, matter, and space. So when God stretches time, when he did that, because he can do that, it changed it. Even though the Earth is only 6,000 to 7,000 years old, the universe aged because he stretched it.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't mean that the Earth is 7,000 years old, but the universe aged because God stretched the universe.
Yeah, it's a good point. And there's a lot of evidence that clearly shows a younger universe. But there's evidence, and young age creationists who deal with this have admitted, yeah, there's evidence it's old and there's evidence it's young. So we have a problem. All this evidence it's old, all this evidence is young. Well, my model fits both without a problem. And I think that's the only way to resolve the two, because there is clear evidence that the universe is not 20-some billion years old, as they say. Go ahead.
I have often wondered, when thinking about the stars and the starlight coming through the universe, how light could exist for 14 billion years coming from any source. For instance, I mean, I've done this as a kid and even as an adult. I'll shine a bright flashlight up in the sky and I tell myself, I wonder how far that light's going to go from here to the moon or beyond the moon. The point is, light just goes so far it seems to dwindle.
Yeah, the energy of light is absorbed.
A star has the ability to shine through the universe for so many billions of years, if that's how many years it is. I don't believe it's that long anyway, but even 6,000 years. But I think it's because a star continues to shine. It doesn't shine, blink, and then it's off, and then the light's coming towards us. It is continuous, right?
Yeah. As light travels, of course, in space, space is not a complete vacuum. It has dust, a lot of dust and so on in it. And a lot of that light is absorbed. That's true. That's part of it. And there are other problems. With redshift, there's a problem. Blue shift, of course. Redshift, you're familiar with the Doppler effect and so on. But anyway, why don't I get on to the next presentation? Darwin is a universal acid that corrodes everything. And this, I think, is an important presentation because it may surprise you to learn that since Christ, 77 million Christians have been martyred. In the last century alone, 45.5 million Christians have been martyred. And this is according to authorities by a book published by Oxford University Press. People who have studied this extensively, and they define what martyr is, so it's not just people killed in car accidents. It's people who were killed because of their faith. 45.5 million died in the past century. Okay, the 1900s, the 20th century. And these Christians that were martyred primarily were martyred by people who were inspired by Charles Darwin. Specifically, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, and of course Marx did not himself involve himself in the killings as the others did, but he certainly influenced what happened. So we're talking about a horrendous history. And if you studied World War II, I have a book out there which I wrote about Darwin and Hitler. And when you study World War II, you can see how incredibly calamitous this was in terms of loss of life, property, families, etc. Just horrendous. In World War II alone, you're talking about 55 million people that died directly as a result of the war. World War II was about 7 times greater than all previous wars put together. So we're talking about a cataclysm unequaled in history. Why did this occur? Well, when we look at the most evil men, people usually say, Hitler, he's always first or second, Stalin, Lenin, Mao. These are always mentioned, and a few others. But yet all of these were clearly, from their own writing, from the documents that we have, after all, we're not talking about 1,000 years ago. We're talking about a century to a half a century ago. All of these men were heavily influenced, clearly, by Charles Darwin. So when someone asks me who was the most evil man in history, I have to conclude it was Charles Darwin. Now, I know he had a good marriage, and he was a great father. Of course, Hitler was a great uncle, I was told. Okay, and I guess Stalin wasn't such a great father, but so he falls back on there. But yeah, there were good things about Darwin. They weren't all evil. But his work caused the most evil events in the history of the world. No question. And I'm trying to document this. I've got the 2 books out here on one on Hitler and the other on Darwin. And I have 3 more books coming out which document this. That now, it's when people haven't heard this before, they're surprised because, well, there are 8,000 churches that celebrate Darwin Day. 8,000 churches that celebrate Darwin Day. There are more churches celebrate Darwin Day than St. Paul, which surprises me. And I have close relatives that celebrate it. And every time February 12th, I think, comes along, his birthday is, they send me a postcard and say, oh, come and celebrate Darwin Day with us at our church. And so now they're not aware of all this. I think a lot of people are not aware of all this. And therefore, Hitler is lionized. Also, Hitler is regarded by scientists, and I've got dozens of quotes, as the greatest man that ever lived. Well, he was in one way, but not in the way that they claim. Okay, I'll try to go through this quickly. I've already covered this. My conclusion is Darwin, because of his work. And let me define evolution. Usually when they present presentations like this by various people, they don't define evolution. Well, you have to define evolution so people know what I'm talking about. Evolution is from nothing to everything by chance, time, natural law, and natural selection. That's evolution. From nothing to everything. Some people might add from hydrogen to everything. And that definition is used in several of the films that I use in my class. What is natural law? Well, natural law, part of it, a major part, is gravity. The 4 forces: strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, and gravity. These are the 4 forces that hold the universe together. And scientists would say everything is a result of those 4 forces. That produced everything. That's what they would say. And another definition is, from the goo to you by way of the zoo. And think about it. It's poetic, but it's what they teach. From the goo to you by way of the zoo. And how do we get from the goo, the primordial ooze, to people? Well, accumulation of mistakes, called mutations. Okay, that's what they teach. And when I say this, sometimes people say, oh, they don't teach that. Well, you want to look at my textbooks that we use? You want to look at what they say? One of them does say, from hydrogen to people, that's evolution. From hydrogen to people, given a lot of time, and given a lot of mistakes, a lot of mutations. And so you are the result of lots of mistakes. That's how you got here. Lots of mistakes. And I don't know about your life, but my mistakes haven't improved things for me. No. Maybe they have for you, but they haven't for me. They haven't improved things at all. In fact, most of my mistakes were mistakes. They did not make things better. And with the genome, the same thing. They don't make things better as a whole. 99.99% of the mutations they estimate are harmful. So most are harmful. Now, it's true there are occasional mutations that are beneficial. I mean, I'm not denying it. There are several. There's just one they discovered recently that seems to be beneficial. There are some beneficial mutations. There are some beneficial mistakes we make. You know, we sometimes turn down the wrong road and end up finding a really great restaurant at the end of that road. I mean, that happens. But by and large, by making mistakes, we don't get where we want to go. We end up with, well, with the genome, they call this degeneration of the genome, eventually which causes genetic catastrophe, which is, in other words, genetic meltdown, which causes extinction. And that's what happens. And that's why this one reference, and there are many references I could quote, but this one reference basically said for the past 5,000 years or so, we have been going downhill genetically. Okay, and there are a number of references. One reference, which I think is quite good, by Dennis Noble, who does a great job, by the way, in this. And he is a physiologist. He wrote an article about physiology titled, "Physiology is Rocking the Foundations of Evolutionary Biology." And he concludes here, and I'll read you the sentence, "In this article, I will show that all the central assumptions of the modern synthesis, often called neo-Darwinism, have been disproved." He's a professor at Oxford University, Department of Physiology, Anatomy, and Genetics at Oxford University. Okay? Now, he proposes another theory. So he's not a creationist, he's not an intelligent design supporter, but he proposes another theory which I think has even more problems. And that's the problem when they refute classical neo-Darwinism. they propose other theories, and invariably these other theories have more problems. Okay? It's so hard to say, well, you know, maybe a creator, maybe an intelligent creator did it. Maybe we have to look for the evidence of design in the natural world. And one other study I'll relate, and I could relate lots of them, but this is a headline. The scientist Robert Lee Holtz said most science studies appear to be tainted by sloppy analysis. Gee. It's another study which found most science studies in time turn out to be wrong. And this is a peer-reviewed journal that talks about this. Okay, moving on. Atheistic communism. Evolution was not a minor aspect, according to this historian. Not a minor aspect, but rather a central plank in Marx's doctrine. Marx was a committed Christian until he encountered the materialistic and atheistic ideas at the University of Berlin as a student, and that's from this author here. And there's Marx as a young man. We often see him in the older pictures, this picture, but that's what he looked like as a young man. He was from a family of rabbis. He was Jewish. He became a Lutheran when he was a young man and went through a Lutheran education and wrote a great deal about his strong commitment to Christianity. Well, when he met Darwin, of course, that changed things. And he became not only a anti-Christian, but a militant anti-Christian. And talked a lot about the harm that religion has done in society. And he's famous for what cliche? Do you remember? Anybody remember what cliche? Religion is what? Religion is the opiate of the people. So not a very good impression. And basically, let's see, Culp here, and I think this is Isaac Berlin, another historian, Isaiah Berlin, sorry, says, no thinker in the 19th century is so direct, deliberate, and powerful an influence upon mankind as Karl Marx. The Origin of Species, Darwin's book, impressed Marx perhaps as deeply as any book he read in his maturity. Culp, a historian, concluded. And his anti-Christianity was clear. Became a Darwinist. He detested any belief in supernatural causes. He also openly denounced all religions as, here, the opiate of the people. In nearly every nation where the communists assumed power, the churches were either abolished outright or neutralized. And that's true. I'm not aware of any exceptions. Communism goes along with atheism. The communist philosophy is intertwined with atheism. And when communism has taken over a country, and Nazism as well, one of the first things they try to do is eliminate Christianity. Now, in Russia, they had a hard time doing that because they were fighting the Germans, the Nazis. And so basically, Lenin and Stalin said, we'll get the Christians later. We've got to get the Germans first. Once we defeat the Germans, then we can worry about the Christians. And as a result, they never did totally abolish Christianity, but that was their goal. Before becoming converts to Darwinism, Marx, Stalin, Hitler, and Mao Zedong all accept the Christian teaching that all humans were brothers because they are all descendants of Adam and Eve. Okay? They continued to embrace Christian creationism. They would not have become leaders of the anti-Christian totalitarian movements that ideologically oppose Christianity. At least that's my conclusion. This is a quote from this writer, and this is my conclusion. But if they had embraced Christianity, love your neighbors, love your enemy, help the poor, help the weak, they would not have did what they did under the banner of communism. So my conclusion is that we wouldn't have had these 77 million martyrs. Well, at least 45.5 million we wouldn't have had. And communism, Nazism alone killed about 167 million just in around World War II. And then, of course, diseases and so on, what they call government-caused famines in Ukraine specifically, caused millions of other deaths. And Lenin, likewise, he was influenced by Darwinism. He was raised by devout Bible-believing parents. Now, in 1892, he discovered, guess what, Darwin and Marx, and his life and the world changed forever. And there's Lenin. Okay, he developed a fascination with the ideas of Charles Darwin, to the degree that Marx and Darwinism soon became his new religion, according to this author. Engels, same thing. Marx worked with Engels, co-author of his works, a lot of his works. Engels started seriously questioning his faith when he read liberal German theologians such as Bruno Bauer at the University of Berlin, and a major factor influenced these liberal theologians was, guess what? The writings of Charles Darwin. So you can see labeling Darwin as the most evil man that ever lived is at least reasonable, at least possible. And Joseph Stalin, he was a seminary student, and then he discovered Darwin, and he ended up killing, I have 60 million here. Some estimate more than that. It's hard to count the number that died, so historians have tried to figure this out, but even 60 million is pretty horrendous. While he was a student, he read Darwin, became an atheist. A friend of his relates that Joseph said, "You know there's no God." I was astonished, his friend said. "How can you say such a thing?" So what they called Stalin back then. I guess that was his boyhood name. "I'll lend you a book to read," Stalin said. "We'll show you that all this talk about God is sheer nonsense." Now, he was in the seminary when he said this. And then, "What book is that?" his friend inquired. "Darwin, you must read it." And, of course, he did, and there's Stalin as a young man. Stalin soon became an avid Darwinian, abandoned his faith in God, began to tell his fellow seminarians that people were descended from apes and not from Adam. And we all know what happened. And this, I count some of the deaths caused by communist civil war fatalities, 16 million, caused by collectivization of agriculture, 22 million, purges, 19 million, killed during the war, 15 million, executions, and so on, and you can see how it gets up to a horrendous number of people. One Harvard study evaluated the 902 major wars that occurred between 500 BC and AD 1918, including the number of combatants and casualties of all World War I, was 7 times greater than that of all the 901 previous recorded wars combined. And then World War II was 4 times greater than World War I. So I was being underestimating when I said 7 times. It's more than 7 times. But we can see no matter what number we use, it's horrendous. It's said that if one person dies, it's a tragedy. If thousands die, it's a statistic. And that all too often is true. And this is the book where I document a lot of this about Darwin, how important he was, and how you can see where people would develop the ideas they did from reading Charles Darwin. Darwin was clearly, in his 1871 book, a racist. There you can see pictures of him. To me, he looks like an angry man. I don't know. If I saw him on the street, I probably would cross over to the other side.
Does he look a little Neanderthal as well?
And he looks a little Neanderthal. Yeah, these eyebrows there. But if I was posing for a portrait, I'd at least smile. I mean, he could do that. And Darwin's major goal in developing his theory was religious. He wanted to murder God. That was his words. It's like committing a murder. And how do you murder God? You destroy the reason they believe in him. Why do people believe in God? They believe in God because of the creation. You ask people, why do you believe in God? Well, look at the creation. Look at the beauty of the flowers, the trees, the birds. Believe in God because look at the marvelous creation. There must be a creator. Look at the sunset and the moon and the stars and so on. So what people believe in God because the evidence around them says there's a creator. There's a creation, there must be a creator. So Darwin realized the only way you can murder God is to convince people there is another creator, namely natural selection and later on mutations. So if you convince people there's another creator, time, chance, natural selection, and so on, you are murdering God. And of course, Darwin was very successful. Before Darwin, every scientist, as far as we know, was a creationist. After Darwin, slowly but surely, more and more scientists became evolutionists, rejecting creationism. As a matter of fact, a survey of eminent scientists, the leading scientists, found that about 96% are atheists. The vast majority of leading scientists are atheists. So Darwin was successful. And there you can see Origin of Species. The subtitle was Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. That's the British spelling. And Darwin said, I would give absolutely nothing to the theory of natural selection if it required miraculous additions at any one stage of descent, which would make my deity, natural selection, superfluous, and would hold the deity, if such there be, accountable for phenomena which are rightly attributed only to natural selection. So that's pretty obvious. I mean, he said himself basically was trying to do, replacing God with natural selection. That was his deity. That was his God. And a historian of Darwin said, many leading Darwinists accept Darwinism purely because they saw it as a means of achieving the destruction of theism and the establishment of naturalism. Replace theism with naturalism. First among scientists, then among the population at large. And Darwin understood evolution by design was true, and the argument of design was dead, and all that went with it. Namely, the existence of a personal God, free will, life after death, immutable moral laws, and ultimate meaning in life. That's what this scholar said. Okay, I'll do a couple more. I could go on for 3 hours, but I'm not sure you want to do that. But fact is, evolutionary theory weakened one of the most compelling arguments for the existence of God, the argument from design. Theists, going back at least as far as Thomas Aquinas, had argued that the intricate design found in organisms was evidence of a designer, namely God. And of course, he destroyed that. Any questions? Comments? Am I too strong, or go ahead?
Jeffrey, you said that there are actually some positive mutations.
Yeah.
What are they?
The one is AIDS is caused by a virus entering the cell, and if there's two receptors, if one, the CCR5 receptor, is damaged, then AIDS cannot get in the cell, and as a result, one is largely immune from getting HIV. So, and there's a few others, but of course that's a mutation which causes damage, which in the long run, though, is beneficial to the person who has the mutation. But there's a side problem with that, in that these people are also more likely to develop certain forms of cancer. Develop certain forms of cancer. So they call that the unintended consequence, and that would be a result of, you get a benefit, but there's a side problem which accrues with that benefit. And that's an example. Go ahead, back there.
For my master's degree in science, I took statistics and probability. Just the fact that 99.99% of all mutations are
Harmful or near neutral.
right.
Forgot. Harmful or near neutral.
That's a game you cannot win. I'm amazed that people that call themselves scientists believe in such garbage, because you can't make progress by taking one step forward and then 99.999% everything backwards.
Yeah.
You will always be selected against and die. You'll become extinct because of all of the bad mutations. I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing. And of course, Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA, in his book Life Itself, he calculates what are the odds that you can get even just one single molecule of one small protein by chance, and it's one chance, and these are just the combinatorial odds, one chance in 10 to the 260th power, and he reminds us there are only 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe. How people that call themselves scientists can believe that absolute rubbish blows my mind.
Yeah. It takes more faith to accept evolution than creationism. That's true. But scientists recognize this. They say, well, we'll keep looking. We've only been looking for 150 years. I mean, Darwin died in, 1882, I think. His famous book was 1859, so, we've had only 150 years or so being able to look at this. We'll keep looking. But they accept an a priori that there is no intelligent creator. We're here. We got here somehow. There's no creator. Evolution has to be true. So they accept it by default. A problem we have, of course, is only one view is presented in the schools typically. They hear one view consistently over and over again, and people are going to accept it. And in the other PowerPoint, I talk about Hitler. And Hitler said if you keep repeating something long enough, people will accept almost anything. Control the schools, and you control people's minds. And of course, that's what Hitler did, that's what Stalin did, and that's what many people today are trying to do. Once you control the schools, you control what information that they receive. And therefore, you can indoctrinate people into accepting the Darwinian worldview. I read about one book a week. I read a lot, about 50 books a year. Mostly science books. Rarely do I read fiction. And pretty much all of them talk about evolution as if it was true and fact, and never mention creationism except in a derogatory way. So no matter, I'm reading a book now on psychology, which has nothing to do with evolution, directly at least, and it talks about when man evolved from the Neanderthals, when man was evolved, and why do we explain this? Well, this is as a result of our evolution and so on. So they explain so many things just by using the word evolution. It's almost magic. Well, why do people behave this way? Well, we evolved this way. So it explains things. Of course, it doesn't explain anything, in fact, but they use it as an explanation. So we, unfortunately, are indoctrinated into a worldview which it's clear to most of you is not true.
Can you maybe comment on something? I can't remember who I heard it from. It was another creationist. He said he was also got involved in the science behind it, and that he said there is no evidence in science whatsoever of one species, even if it evolved, never crossed another species to create, completely different species. In other words, a cat's always been a cat. A cat doesn't become a dog over time. So how could it become a person?
Yeah, that's a good point. The problem the evolutionists utilize is it's hard to define a species. It's said that if there were no dogs alive today and all we had was a fossil record, we would probably classify all the dogs that we know today in 10 different species. I mean, think of a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. And they wouldn't likely classify those as the same species. We know they're the same species because they will interbreed. I know that's not very feasible, but I used to say they couldn't interbreed, and I had a student who said, I'm a dog breeder. Chihuahuas. And I've done it, so don't say it can't be done, Dr. Bergman, you're wrong. I said, well, I didn't know you could do it. And he said, yeah, you can. I didn't ask him for details, but it is done. And so all dogs can interbreed, so we know they are one species. Problem we have with species as well is that we used to think lions and tigers and jaguars and household cats were different species. And now we've interbred a lot of them, and we realize they're the same species. So you can get a tiger and a liger would be a tiger and a lion. And they've didn't bother to do that in the past because they felt it couldn't be done, and somebody tried to do it, and now we've got a lot of interesting new creatures. Even a house cat, I'm told, and a lion can interbreed, although you've got the size problem again. But
I guess my point was, if an animal like an ape could evolve into a human, then wouldn't the reverse be true, that a human could evolve into a dog or cat?
well, evolutionists say evolution can never go backward. I don't know why they say that, but that's a rule. Evolution never goes backward, only goes forward. But yeah, you're right. That's another problem with Darwinism. And I spent a lot of time looking at the fossil record. I have a book coming out fairly shortly. I looked at the fossil record of horses, of birds, of insects, of fungi, of plants, of giraffe, etc. And there's simply no evidence for linking major genera, at least to other major genera. So it's just not there. And scientists say, well, we'll keep looking, we'll find evidence. That's a common answer, just, well, give us time. Or some will say, well, we can't answer everything yet, but we're working on it. It's a faith position, evolution is. And not uncommonly, evolutionists admit it's a faith position. They accept evolution on faith. There's a book titled, It Takes More Faith to Be an Evolutionist Than a Creationist. And I forget who wrote that, but that is the title of a book. Other questions or comments?
When 40 years ago or 50 years ago, when they said the Earth was 2 billion years old, what evidence do they have now to say it was 4.6 billion?
Well, one reason the age gets longer is they find other things can't be explained by evolution, etc. So if you add more time, that allows them to at least begin to explain things. There's not enough time for certain animals to evolve. Well, we'll just push the date back. That's the problem Darwin had. He didn't have enough time, And then as the date has been pushed back farther, because in Darwin's day, you're only talking about, what, a couple 100,000 years they thought the Earth was? What did Lord Kelvin say the Earth was? I forget, 100,000 years? 200,000 years? But as the data has been pushed back, it allows evolution to say, well, given enough time, anything is possible. And there's an article in Scientific American in 1953, which I think is 53, which brings that out. And go ahead.
Has any scientist ever come close enough to making life from non-life that the evolutionists can hang their hats on that?
No, no, and that's recognized as impossible. They have taken genes from one bacteria and put them into another, and that's said to be, they said it's creating life, but it's really not creating life, it's just moving parts around. But we've been pretty good at that. We take a human gene that makes insulin, put it in the bacteria, and the bacteria produces, guess what? Human insulin. So we've done that pretty successfully, which says something about evolution. If indeed bacteria are, quote, primitive, why can they take a human gene, and works pretty well to tweak few things, but why can bacteria, so-called primitive organisms, take a human gene and make perfect insulin? So it's the same, basically the same system. The ribosomes are different. There are differences, but they're basically the same. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was the book that you were referring to earlier? I know of a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek.
I think that's the one, yeah.
You were referring to? Okay.
I think that's the one, yeah. Thank you for...
to clarify that in case people wanted to buy it. I have a copy of it. It's a very good book. I would recommend it.
Okay, good. Go ahead. Wait till the mic gets up here and you can... Everybody can hear you. Right here.
The evolutionists say that the apes are 97%.
Most favorable to the evolutionist is something like 80-some%. So probably closer to 70%.
I want to mention that the ape and the monkey DNA is actually longer than human. I think human is like 2.2 million base pairs, and the primates are like 2.5 million or 2.6 million base pairs.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer. That's true.
So how can they be 97% the same when there's that much difference in length to begin with? That's ridiculous.
Well, that's one very good reason why they're not 98% the same. Just by length alone, you're not going to get 98%. You'll get something considerably less than that. That's one of many reasons why they're so different. I guess creationists have to wonder why they're so different. Because physiologically, the ape body is very similar to a human. And why are they so different, since the hearts are the same, the kidneys are the same, most of the organs are the same? Why would there be so many different genetic differences?
Same creator.
Same creator, yeah, that's probably one good reason. Any other questions?
I think what happens a lot of times is we try, scientists try to wow us with saying there's so much similarity. A watermelon and a cloud are both 99% water.
I'll take the watermelon. We've had too many clouds lately, in my opinion. Over here?
What do you think of the resurrection of that great educator, Carl Sagan, in the new TV show?
I haven't seen it yet, but I have friends who have, and they say he really pushes, Neil deGrasse Tyson really pushes Darwinism. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is nasty towards creationists. We are stupid. We're ignorant. Is how he responds. So he's not a real favorable toward, not a very congenial type of guy. And although he does a great job, and I have a lot of his tapes that I show in my classroom, does a really good job, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's, so probably the film will be very useful, but he will again try to push his evolutionary ideas, evolutionary worldview in the film, which I'm told he's already done. But I watched The Cosmos probably 8 times, showed it for my class many times, and I'll probably watch this 8 times or more. So, but it's disconcerting when they say things that are clearly wrong. You wonder about the other things you don't know about. And if he's wrong about these things, can I really accept what he has to say about other things? Well, that's a problem. And I don't know how we deal with that, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You mentioned something else that's a really big thing that just blows my mind, that people that call themselves scientists actually believe it. You mentioned that scientists now, they only accept natural causes. Now, obviously, if nature, the universe and everything in it, had a beginning, and scientists now acknowledge that the universe had a beginning, then, and there are 4 separate areas of science that confirm this, then obviously it has to have a supernatural cause, because nothing can create itself, number one, because you have to exist before you can do anything, including create yourself. So it must have come from a supernatural source that did exist during the whole time when the universe didn't exist. But there's a second big scientific reason, and that's the first law of thermodynamics. The universe is mainly energy in one form or another. It's mainly energy and mass. And we know mass is a form of energy in concentrated form because of Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared.
Right.
So if the universe is mainly energy, but we know from the first law of thermodynamics, the universe never creates any energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. The energy of the universe is constant, and their energy is neither created by the universe or destroyed by it. It's just changed from one form to a lesser form, and that's the second law. So obviously, if the universe is mainly energy, but the universe itself never creates energy, obviously it must have been created by something else that does and can create energy. That blows my mind that people would believe, that you could get something from nothing, number one, and that they just deny and defy, laws of science like the first law of thermodynamics, to mention, many others too.
Well, they would say, we're working on it. Just give us time. Number one. Number two, they argue quantum fluctuations, where things appear out of nowhere, and that's called a free lunch universe. And there's a book that just came out which he argues, although I read the whole book and he only has one or two lines arguing for quantum fluctuations, but the title of the book is, and I forget the exact title, but basically he argues the universe came from nothing, and quantum fluctuations. But in many ways that's a word, and it's hard to say that quantum fluctuation is nothing which becomes something, because we're not sure that nothing which becomes something is actually nothing.
Right.
Might be something else, like dark matter or dark energy. Those are the two explanations now, which in my astronomy book talks a lot about dark energy and dark matter. We can't figure out how the universe works, so we postulate dark matter and dark energy, which makes it work. And there are a number of reasons why it doesn't work. We don't have enough mass to produce the gravity necessary to produce the holding together of the galaxies, etc. So they postulate dark matter, and we don't have enough energy either, so they postulate dark energy. What those are, we don't know. They used to think neutrinos was part of the dark matter, but that's probably only a small percent. We're still trying to figure out what dark matter is. So, but that makes science interesting, though, actually.
Aren't they just substituting, instead of the God of the gaps, which they all detest, aren't they just substituting nature of the gaps?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, that's true. That's back here and then up here, please.
Is there a particular scripture that God used in changing your mind?
Especially the ones that basically stress the fact that the heavens declare the glory of God, and by the God's works are manifest in the creation. A lot of the scriptures that relate to creation were important, and in my experience, they resonated with me. Go ahead.
The first law of I forgot.
First law of thermodynamics?
What Tom Phillips just mentioned, that the first law of thermodynamics is the matter and energy cannot be created. That's how it's stated nowadays. Okay, 60 years ago, when I started teaching science in high school, The science book said matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed by ordinary chemical means. Okay? By ordinary chemical means. 60 years ago it said this. They dropped the words by ordinary chemical means from the law over the 60 years since I taught science in the science books. That's how it was written, okay? So, what you notice when you say by ordinary chemical means in that law, matter and energy can be created by supernatural means then, right? That's the way it used to be written, okay? And that's what we say by creationists, that matter and energy can be created, and were created by God, of course. And the end of the world, Revelation states that the end of the world, matter and energy will be destroyed. So according to the first law of energy that was stated years ago, that's why we should be teaching it today also.
Good point. Anything back here is?
Also, our magnetic field is diminishing, and if it was millions of years, we wouldn't be here either.
Yeah, that's another point. And some of the planets, I think Mars, they're looking at the magnetic field deterioration. And Venus, I think, as well. Go ahead.
Can you remember a specific day or time, or what was the final thing when you had to admit there must be a creator God?
Well, I didn't have a Pauline on the road to Damascus experience. In my experience was the water kept getting higher and higher and higher until finally the dam broke. And it was a result of accumulation of all these things that caused the dam to break. It wasn't any one thing that caused it to break. It was accumulation. And I found in my book, just Transformed by the Evidence, which, by the way, is all sold out, so you can't buy it, too bad. But my other book, Persuaded by the Evidence, many people in there, this was their experience as well. And that, I find, really is quite a common experience of people I've known. There's the breaking of the dam is more common than the road to Damascus blinding experience, which caused one to be converted. Although some people, indeed, they had a Damascus on the road experience. So, hope that answers your question.
Some time ago you said that the fact that all that's taught in schools now is evolution.
Right.
So naturally our children all grow up with that. But a lot of us that are older, you know, in school we weren't taught this garbage. And I think one of the facts that's turning a lot of elderly people to this belief of evolution is if you watch the ads on television or read ads in magazines and that, I can name just two real quickly. One was on television, and it was a guy holding a sugar beet. And he was in front of a huge field of sugar beets, and he said, "This is our energy of the future, and it doesn't take millions of years to create." Another one was they were down in like the Carlsbad Caverns or someplace on a raft, floating, and they were shining a light on the stalactites, and they were stating about the beauty of this that took millions of years to create. Well, it happened to be an ad for batteries, you know, but I mean, if you really watch this, I have a large collection of these at home. More and more ads include stuff like this. In fact, Chrysler right now has some ad, I can't recall it right offhand, and they mention millions of years in the ad.
Yeah.
So I think this is what's turning a lot of our elderly people into also this belief of millions of years.
We are indoctrinated by our society, and that's exactly how Hitler turned the most educated people in the world, more Nobel Prizes than any other country, clearly the world's leader in science and technology. He turned them to accept the idea that some races, like the Slavics, the Jews, the blacks, were inferior and need to be eliminated. And the nation pretty much went right along with that. And a lot of people aren't aware of this, but his goal was to eventually murder most, at least, of the Slavs, Poles, Czechoslovakia, Russians, Ukrainians, a lot of people there, and make them slaves and eventually eliminate them, and eventually then they'll be taken over by the superior race, the German Aryan race. Now, how do you convince people something so ludicrous as that? And interesting, Goebbels' wife was a Slav, Czechoslovakian. And, he would think he'd look at his wife and say, and they had beautiful kids, by the way. If you want to see pictures of them, I'll show you the pictures of their kids. They were lovely kids. And I'll show you briefly if I can get there. I think I included it here. This is all, there's the superior race. Blue eyes, by the way, those eyes are mutated because the natural color of our eyes is blue, covered by brown. And she doesn't have that covering, therefore she's very sensitive, as I am, to light. Okay? So if you have blue eyes, it's a result of a mutation which does not produce the brown necessary to color the iris diaphragm, which is necessary to protect the eyes. So she probably has a heart, and there's a couple. And these are all the things they use to measure whether you're a superior person. This guy got the award as the ideal German soldier, blasted throughout Germany. He's the ideal German soldier. Ideal German, period, actually, and he found out he was Jewish. Corporal Goldberg. So how do you know if someone's a Jew? Well, you have to put a sign on them. So if you have to put a sign on an inferior race, how can you say they're inferior? But yet people, many people accepted this. And this woman especially, I don't know, she looks like many women I know. She doesn't look like a German Jew. And I guess I don't go into his family here, but anyway, there's the eye charts they use to determine if you're a member of an inferior race. And they got them all worked out, all the eye colors. And they measured the forehead, the skull, etc. They were trying to see whether this guy is a member of the superior race or the inferior race. The more monkey-like his traits, the less evolved he was supposed to be. And this is an excellent book published by the Holocaust Museum, Creating the Master Race, which clearly documents Hitler's goal was to create a superior race. It's all based on evolution. And that's why I say if it wasn't for Darwinism, probably wouldn't have had a World War II. If we did have a World War II, it would have turned out very different. When he moved into Ukraine, for example, Ukrainians welcomed the Nazis. They would rather be ruled by the Germans than the Russians. He welcomed the Nazis. But it didn't take long when they started killing the inferior Ukrainians, which was most of them, it didn't take long for them to realize they're better off with the Russians. And then they turned against the Germans and moved to the other side of the war. So Hitler could have gotten a lot of people on his side because there are a lot of people unhappy with the situation in Europe. He only didn't have this idea of inferior races. He only treated the people decently. He would have had probably conquered most of Europe, and they would be very happy under German rule. Wouldn't have been a problem. Okay? But he starts killing millions of people, and all of a sudden then it turned the people against him. And that's one thing they document in this book. Excellent book, a huge book, published by the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Go ahead.
I don't understand why evolutionists ignore the second law of thermodynamics so completely.
Well, I say it doesn't hold because the sun adds energy, and that only holds in a closed system. The Earth is not a closed system. Of course, the problem with that is you need more than energy. You need a way of utilizing the energy, like plants and et cetera, so that the energy can be utilized to build something constructive. So without something that can utilize the energy, it doesn't matter how much energy you have, you're not going to get life. So you have to remember it's a belief, and I've talked to a lot of audiences, and the evolutionists, they get emotional, and I've had people come up to the stage, try to pull me off the podium. I've had, on the internet especially, they are really nasty. They resort to name-calling very quickly. And they're so emotional because you're attacking their worldview, their central way they look at the world. And they have a hard time dealing with that. And that's why they become so emotional. And they commonly do. I had a university professor at Maryland University try to pull me off the stage. He was a professor. He looked like a 60s hippie, and I asked one of the people there who it was, and she said, "Oh, that's my paleontology professor." It surprised me. I didn't expect the professor would behave that way. Well, that should surprise me, but I guess it did. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What about like the expansion of the universe? And like how do you explain that, like, your model? And, like, another thing I've asked my physics teacher, and he wasn't able to really answer my question, is if, like, the universe is, like, the entire material world, like, what is it expanding into? Like, how is it expanding? Like,
They say space is expanding. And the reason expansion is necessary because it produces stability. And that's why the Earth spins, goes around the sun. Everything moves in the universe, and that produces stability. The Earth spins, it goes around the sun, the whole solar system moves, the whole galaxy moves, the whole set of galaxies, the local group moves. So wherever you see movement, and movement produces stability. So that's why things have to move. And that's why the expansion of the universe is important, produce stability.
You said that expansion of the age of the solar system doubled since you were in school.
Right.
What was the evidence that they had then, and what do they have now?
Well, they had about the same evidence, but they just realized they couldn't fit all they were trying to in 2 billion years, so they just moved the date.
Where did they come out with that figure to start with?
Primarily, they use radioactive dating, uranium and thorium, and I'm not sure which isotopes, various isotopes they use. And there are a lot of problems with radioactive dating, but I don't want to go into that now. Go ahead.
It seems that one of the main reasons Christians are turning to the gap theory today is because of supposed geological evidence. What evidence is there to refute that?
Which, the gap theory?
Yeah, geologic evidence supporting the universe older than 60.
Well, they assume a lot of the stuff that we talked about, they assume that's true, and therefore there has to be more time than Genesis allows, therefore they have to account for that, and therefore they propose the gap theory. So, but the model I am giving you in creation ex nihilo, always you have built-in appearance of age, and therefore you don't need the gap theory. You don't need to propose that. I guess you could if you wanted to, but most Christians that I know don't accept the gap theory. That was popular a few years ago. It's actually losing popularity. It was in the King James, the Schofield, was it, reference Bible? The gap theory was mentioned. So that popularized it a lot, but I don't know many that point to that now. So some, I imagine, do, but.
I was wondering if you could recommend, you mentioned how the theology schools are not even teaching, God's way. Are there any Christian schools that you would recommend in this area, as far as colleges?
Cedarville, Biola, Liberty University, Bob Jones University, and there are a few others. I'm trying to. Maranatha. Wisconsin Lutheran, yeah. Concordia.
Thank you. That's good to know there's still a few around that teach the truth.
The one way up north, northwestern, what is the one way up north? Northland, yeah, there's the one.
Master's College, that's another one.
The gentleman over there was talking about what evidence is there geologically for the Earth not being millions of years old. I don't know specifically, but I know there's a lot of assumptions that are made in radiometric dating and carbon dating that are really big stretches for assumptions. And if you study more about that, that the decay rates are always the same way, the same rate, and that that there's a certain amount of carbon left. That if you go into a room and you see sand, what am I trying to say? The sand hourglass. Thank
Hourglass.
you. If you go in and you see that it's halfway done, you assume that somebody must have just turned it over 50 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Well, they may have just turned it over a minute ago. You don't know what your starting point is, but a lot of the radiometric and carbon dating make a lot of assumptions that are really big stretches.
Yeah.
So I think that gives you, some evidence that what scientists say that these radiometric datings are very accurate. That's nonsense.
Yeah. Carbon-14 you're probably talking about, which decays to nitrogen-14, half-life of 5,730 years, I believe. So yeah, carbon-14. Carbon-14 though, they admit is only good for say 50,000 years or so. So they have to use other radioactive decay methods to determine the dates. They use a lot of different things to try to come up with a conclusion, and the estimates vary. So which says a lot.
They've even had animals that have died, and they take samples from the same animal. Look at the animal 60,000 years old, and it's just dying.
Yeah.
Don't believe all the data. A lot of them are
A good scientist is skeptical. That's how science advances. Up here, comment?
Do you want to know how some people can believe in like the Big Bang, but yet they believe in creation also? Then what do you think of that?
Yeah, a lot of people, they feel science is right and the Bible is right, so they become theistic evolutionists. And the problem with that is prove evolution first. When evolution is true, then we'll worry about harmonizing the Bible with science. But many of us are fully convinced that evolution is not true from, again, from molecules to man, is not true, and therefore why bother harmonizing it? As they say, theistic evolution is bad theology and bad science. But it's an attempt for people who are naive about this. I've spent 30 years studying this. I read an average of a book a week or so. So most people haven't spent that much time, and therefore they assume what scientists say. After all, they're scientists, they have PhDs, they must be right, and therefore they say, this is the way it is, and therefore they accept that, and they're trying to harmonize it. Again, it's a cultural thing. A culture accepts something. And in this case, evolution is accepted by the culture, it's taught by the culture, enforced by the courts, of course. Courts have made it very clear you can only teach information in favor of Darwinism. You cannot teach information against Darwinism because that's seen as backdoor creationism. And that's what courts have ruled. Information against even, there's a teacher, I did a chapter of him on my book, which I think is sold out, so you can't buy that either, but there's a chapter in my book where I talk about a teacher who only used secular science journals, and they fired him because those journals questioned Darwinism. And he lost his job. In fact, he left the country. He went to Korea now. He teaches Korea, and he tells me he loves it. He'd never come back to the States. Loves it in Korea. He can teach creationism all day and all night. The Koreans love us because otherwise they would be ruled by North Korea, which is not a very good thing. And they love Americans there, and they not only love us, but they love our religion. And so the largest church in the world is in Korea. Massive conversion from their Buddhism or Confucianism to Christianity, because if Americans are Christians, it must be good. And so they've accepted it. There's a huge creation group in Korea. There's thousands of PhD scientists in Korea that are creationists. So that's one war that we entered and did well. Even though we didn't win, we kind of stopped fighting and drew a line between North and South Korea, but that's one war where it turned out well. Wars don't always turn out well. So go ahead.
Going back to your first presentation, a few weeks ago or a month or so ago on the program Origins, and you were just on there 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
But they were talking about light, and they measure light, only reflected light. The light coming from the stars, they don't measure that because there isn't nothing to measure it with, if I understand it.
Yeah, that was brought out earlier, yeah.
So when light was created, I just assumed it's there.
Yeah.
It doesn't travel here because you can't measure if it travels here. You
Like
measure it when it's reflected back.
Like the blood, which is oxygenated, which never went to the lungs. So yeah, that's the same idea.
See, Dr. Jason Lau taught that what he's saying is that's the average speed of light can be measured in 186,000 miles per second, but that's the average round trip.
In a vacuum, in a vacuum.
The way cannot be measured. The only way you would measure it, if you had a hallway that was 186,000 miles long, you could measure the one-way speed of light if you synchronize the clocks. But in order to synchronize the clocks, you have to know the one-way speed of light.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22. There's no way to measure it. So indeed, the one-way speed of light can be instantaneous, and the Bible seems to indicate that.
Okay. Okay. That's a good point. Thank you. Back here?
Yeah, two comments. One, the concept that the Big Bang could have been caused by a quantum fluctuation. The word quantum comes from a discrete amount.
A small amount, yeah. Small discrete amount.
Small amount, yes, because when they looked at various amounts of energies and subatomic particles, they found out they didn't come in continuous quantities, they came in discrete amounts. So that's where the word quantum comes from.
Right.
It's like bricks, as opposed to just some continuous thing. So when they talk about quantum fluctuation, you're talking about a fluctuation in a mass energy field. And since there is no mass energy field pre-existing, there is no possibility of the concept of a quantum fluctuation. They are assuming the universe in order to beget the universe.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I'm my own mother, I birthed myself.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a logical impossibility, okay? They're drowning men grasping at straws, okay?
You said it better than I could. Thank you.
When I heard, what's his name, Hawking mention, no, he said gravity. Somebody else said quantum fluctuation.
Yeah, Lawrence Krauss is the one I'm thinking of.
Okay.
He's the one who wrote that book.
Okay, Krauss, but Hawking says gravity caused it. It's like, wait a minute, gravity is a property of mass. There is no mass. There is no gravity. Therefore, there is no universe, okay? And the other thing is, or another thing is, the Big Bang, not only does it violate the first and second laws of thermodynamics, it also violates the scientific principle of cause and effect. So if you're a scientist, you cannot, by definition, believe in the Big Bang.
Yeah, you just don't have enough faith. That's your problem. You need more faith.
You cannot, as a scientist, believe in the Big Bang. It is a logical fallacy.
If you saw the film by, I forget the fellow who goes around interviewing people on the street, Ray Comfort, but the last quote he had, the woman said, "The problem with you creationists is you just don't have a good imagination." And that's true. I guess we don't. We just aren't very imaginative. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The other comment I wanted to make is with the radiometric dating. If the carbon-14, supposedly the test is only good till about 50,000 years or so, but it seems like every sample of coal that they've ever measured has carbon-14 in it, and now they're measuring pieces of dinosaurs that they've dug up, and those have carbon-14 in it. Well, if those are hundreds of millions of years old or billions of years old, obviously the carbon-14 shouldn't be there. And they're trying to explain, well, okay, because the the coal was in the ground, it wasn't a closed system, it was exposed to some other radiation down there. Well, okay, but then why isn't any other radiometric dating system a non-closed system?
Yeah, good point. You just need more faith, brother. That's all. You just don't have enough faith. You just... Okay, anybody else? And we probably should close pretty soon, so...
Yeah, I've got a question here.
Go ahead.
Two, actually. One's about the fact that there's a microwave background radiation.
Right.
And my understanding is they have, as we have a light problem of how did the light get from these distant stars to Earth in the 6,000 years or so we've been here. They have a light problem where how did light, which is the fastest thing known in the universe, heat up the universe equally in all places with the microwave background radiation. So they can't solve their problem, and we've got a little bit of problem too. But if you look at it from the Bible standpoint, I believe it makes the most sense to have faith with God, who, not the question is, could God have made it in 6 days, but why did it take him so long? I mean, this is a God who says he knows when every sparrow on the earth falls. I mean, it's an infinite being whose mind is infinite. We can't even comprehend that other than he telling us that from Scripture. And the predictions that he knows every day of our life before it even happens, and over 6 billion people can pray to him at the same time. He doesn't get confused. He's aware of everything. It's just mind-blowing. It's really the question, why did it take him so long? And then the next question I got to was, why 6 days? And why not, whatever other amount, 1 day or something?
Yeah.
Just boom, it would have been there in 1 day or 1 second or something.
That's the same problem St. Augustine had. Why did it take so long? Back, when did he live? Long time ago. Okay, one more question, then we can.
Isn't it an important factor that God first created the light? And then, that means that he created the light first. And then it was days later that he created the sun and moon and all that. So this whole issue of how long does it take the light to get from one place to another, I think the Bible clearly answers it when it states that God first created the light before the light sources and all that.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention and all the good questions. And no opposition? You mean nobody disagrees with me? That's got to be somebody that disagrees with me.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
You want to hear about it?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'll make a comment first and then my disagreement with you, which I got from Russell Humphreys. It's not original. I'm not a smart guy. I read other guys' stuff and I plagiarize and I repeat, but I don't have anything original. The light travel problem, the most distant light that has been measured is more than 40 billion light years from Earth. And the universe is supposedly like 14, 15 billion years old. How did that light get here that 40 billion year old light get here in 15 billion years? So the evolutionist has a light travel problem, as well as the creationist that has a light travel problem. It's just we believe the light got here in 6,000 years. They believe the 40 billion year old light got here in 15 billion years. It's not a matter of whether they have a problem or we have a problem. It is the degree of the problem that is the issue. Everybody has a light travel problem. The other thing also is about light travel, and Dr. Russell Humphreys, I got this from. If the creation occurred and the light got here like right away, there's a problem in that we see supernovas that are, supposedly happened 1 billion years ago or whatever, and the light finally just got here and we're able to see it. If God created the light and it got here immediately, then either he made stars that blew up immediately, which doesn't sound right to me, because why would he create something that's supposed to be destroyed? And the other thing is, if you say he created the light already on the way, that means he created a snapshot of a star blowing up, that the star never really existed, and now we're only seeing a photograph of it. Well, my God is not a God of deception, and I don't believe he would just send me a photograph. He would let me see the real thing. So Dr. Humphreys has some ideas about how the light would have gotten here by the expanding universe and a gravity well, because gravitation does affect the speed of time. The speed of light is constant, the speed of time is not constant. So while the clocks are running a certain speed here, you go 1 billion years, light years out into the galaxies, and the clocks are running faster. We know that for sure. So there's a whole lot more going on, and it'd be great if we could get Dr. Humphreys to come. I think we could probably do that sometime, and he could explain it himself, because he knows a lot more about this than I do.
His book, Starlight in Time, explains a lot of this, does a good job explaining a lot of this.
We're out of that book.
You're out of that book? Oh.
Yeah, you see, you keep running
all the
out.
good,
We're running out.
all the good books you're out of. I've got a few good books left. I've got the one on Hitler left and one on Darwin left, so.
I think, Ken, you're going to order that book, right? We might have it next time. I want to make an announcement for next month, Tuesday, April 8th at Brookside Baptist Church. Jerry Fry will be speaking, He is a really excellent speaker, really got some interesting stuff, so you definitely want to make it for that. If you're not on our email list, make sure you sign the sheet. And thank you, Dr. Bergman, for coming and talking to us.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to close in a word of prayer, and then maybe you can hang around, we can talk, look at some books, buy lots of books.
We would appreciate it, as you're getting up from the table, if you put the 6 chairs back around the table, and the chairs over here, if you put them back, and the tables, if they could be put back where they came from, they would appreciate that. So let's close. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to know more about your universe and the wonders of your creation. And we pray, Lord, that you would make us good parents and grandparents to not let our children grow up without hearing the words of truth about Genesis. You know, they can be influenced by textbooks at school and by teachers and by television, but we can't let that go without our influence on them. So we pray, Lord, that you would keep us safe this night and help us tomorrow to enjoy your creation even more.